From MNT-EC, the Micro Nano Technology Education Center, this is Talking Technicians, the podcast about technicians, who they are, what they do, and where they come from. I'm your host, Peter Kazarnoff. I teach technicians and engineers at Portland Community College. In each episode, you'll meet a working technician and hear their story. That means real interviews with real technicians about real jobs. At the end of each episode, you'll hear actions you can take if you want to be a technician too. In this episode, you'll meet Ginny. Ginny is a client success manager at Serviceminder. Ginny works remotely, but Serviceminder is based in Texas. Ginny, welcome to Talking Technicians.
Thanks, Peter. I'm glad to be here. Happy to have a chat.
So, Ginny, I mentioned that Serviceminder is based in Texas, but you currently live in North Carolina. Where in North Carolina are you?
I live in Asheville. That is in Western North Carolina in the mountains. It's a beautiful place. Leaves are starting to turn here now, so it's especially nice getting that crisp fall weather. And it's mainly known for, Biltmore Mansion, Blue Ridge Parkway, lots of breweries. People love beer here. So that's kind of the main draw to have. We have a lot of tourists that come to town. So that's typically what they're here for.
Ginny, what originally brought you to Asheville?
I had grown up in Southwest Virginia, Northeast Tennessee, so kind of over the mountain from here, had moved around the Southeast a lot throughout my 20s and had decided to relocate. I was actually married, went through a divorce to have a child, and we decided to relocate back here a little closer to home, but a little bit of a prettier spot to be.
So, Ginny, I mentioned that you were a client success manager in the intro. What's a client success manager, and what do you do day to day at work?
So, client success manager is one of those terms that I think is being used more often now. It sort of has replaced customer support. Basically, I basically do tech support. So that's kind of when people ask what I do, I typically will just say tech support because I think that paints a clear picture. But the client success part comes in because you are working with your clients to ultimately help them use your product. Serviceminder is a software, so we're trying to help them use their software successfully. So that's kind of where that comes in. I think client success is just a newer spin that I noticed I started seeing a lot in the past couple of years. But day to day, basically, I'm taking client tickets. We have a ticketing system. They send in emails. This is broken, or I can't figure out how to do this, or this setting isn't right. What do I need to do? And we sort of work with them one-on-one, fix the thing or tell them how to fix the thing. And we do some meetings, kind of over Zoom, since we all work remotely. Our clients are very used to that. So we'll have kind of training sessions and things like that here and there. But the most part is working primarily through email. So it's basically not a lot of phone support, luckily, but we do a lot of back and forth emailing with our clients.
Ginny, you mentioned that you manage tickets. For those that don't work in your industry, what does that mean? What's a ticket?
So instead of a client emailing, one person directly, or even trying to send out some sort of email blast to a company, a lot of companies will have a ticketing system. There are a lot of platforms out there that basically have it set up so they can send an email to one email address, and that reaches the whole team, the whole support team or client success team. So it enables the client to, instead of having this one person they're trying to reach, maybe that person's on vacation, or, maybe that person isn't the best person to reach out to for this problem. So basically it comes in like an email, but then we have this whole system set up so that we can see new tickets that come in. People can take them and assign them. People can share them. And it helps us keep track of that. So the requests aren't getting kind of lost in the shuffle. For instance, we can get anywhere from 30 to 60 tickets in a day. It would be very easy for someone to sort of lose track of that in a regular email inbox. So kind of think of it as a group inbox, I guess, with lots of flags and designations.
What kind of salary would someone expect if they get an entry-level position in this type of industry?
So I did notice that pre-COVID, a lot of the entry levels, kind of starting positions in this kind of work were pretty low. I would see them listed in the 30s, and I know that more recently in the spring when I was looking at job postings. I'd basically been doing this at one company, and then I moved to another in the spring, but doing the same type of work. I noticed that in the spring of this year, a lot of the job postings were starting at least 45, typically 50. Sometimes I would see them, depending on the size of the company, I would see the range going all the way up almost to 100 grand. So, I mean, I do think that there's um, a lot of demand for this type of work, and it can be a demanding job. And I think that the salaries are now starting to reflect that a little bit better over the past 2 to 3 years.
Besides earning money for your work, are there other benefits that you get from your employer? Things like health insurance, dental insurance, and retirement?
So I currently get health insurance and dental insurance. We don't have retirement yet. Company I work for now is smaller. It's had a lot of growth over the past couple of years. So looking to add some more of those benefits. I've noticed that that's something else I've seen in job postings. It's a little touch and go. You'll get kind of some of the things, but not all of the things. So I do think that that's something to keep in mind when you're kind of scoping out this line of work.
Ginny, you mentioned that you had a family at home. How much flexibility is there in your work schedule? What kind of hours do you work regularly?
So I work basically 8:30 to 5:30 ish Eastern time. Very flexible though. The company is technically based in Texas. Most of my coworkers work more of a central time schedule, and then I have a couple coworkers that are in Mountain and Pacific time as well. So there's some flexibility to where people can kind of stagger their schedules a little bit. Um, this company and my last company as well are also really great about allowing people to, you know, do the school pickup or the school drop off, or you have to attend an event, or your kid is sick and you have to stay home, kind of thing. Obviously, I don't have to worry about it now because I'm working from home, but there's kind of a set schedule ish, but it's very flexible. I don't have to do any weekends though, so that's great.
Ginny, what did it feel like your first day at work? You've been remote this whole time. What does it feel like being a remote employee on day one?
That was a very different experience. I hadn't done that before. It was both less nerve wracking and more nerve wracking. So you don't have the typical nerves of where am I going to park? Do I pack my lunch? What's my desk going to be like? You don't have those kind of practical, logistical nerves. But at the same time, you're sort of sitting there waiting for your first meeting to start, and you're a little nervous. You're not sure. You've barely set up your computer. There's no one there to help you. You're just hoping everything works. And so it was very different. I had kind of an introductory meeting almost first thing in the morning, but then I was kind of left on my own for a few hours. And then I had another meeting a little later around lunchtime. So that first day was interesting. And, meeting people over video like that is, you have to adjust. It's not quite the same feeling as meeting people in person. But in one way, it did kind of take actually some of the stress and anxiety away, because I had all my comforts around me. I had my chair and my place and my snacks and all of that. So in one way, it was better, but it's a different experience.
Ginny, is there opportunity for professional growth in your industry? You mentioned that people can start at an entry level. Where can you take your career from here?
There's sort of a few paths you can take if you're more interested in a managerial type of path. You can start sort of at the bottom, learn the basics, learn the company really well, and then you can work your way up and be more of a manager of the team, especially as most companies, the support team or client success team will end up growing over time. So sometimes they'll need an additional manager. Sometimes the support will sort of branch off and you'll have kind of different areas of support. So that's one route. Also, depending on the company, if you're doing, like in my job, I do some light development work along with my support tickets. And so if the company that you're at is open to that, some companies will let you sort of, again, learn the basics, learn how the company works, start learning the software, and then you can sort of move up and laterally more into like a development type position.
Ginny, you mentioned that you might do some light development work. For those that don't work in this industry, what is light development work and development work in general? What does that mean?
So for something like a software company, we have a customer facing part of the software. So that's basically if you sign up with any company, even like online banking, something like that, as a customer or client, you're going to see things you can click on, boxes to check, radio buttons to select, accordions that will sort of, you click and it opens and shows you more things. And so we have to kind of build that out to make it pleasing to the customer and also followable. It needs to be usable. But then on the back end, there's all sorts of very intricate things that, on the front side, the customer facing side, it seems like, oh, this is just a few check boxes for my account settings. On the back end, it's just tons of stuff that's all tied together to make it function in that way. So for development, you might be building the back end of that, making sure everything's working as it's supposed to. So if you have a checkbox that says, I don't want to receive these type of emails, we need to make sure that in the back end, everything's talking to everything else and saying, don't send this customer these emails anymore. But then there's also the front end development, which is make this look nice, make sure it looks okay on a phone, make sure it looks okay on the desktop. So that's sort of the heavier development. So what I do, and what I think a fair amount of people will do that are in support or client success positions is the lighter stuff. So that's making very small adjustments. Maybe you're updating an email template, something like that, changing a color, changing out a photo, kind of things that require a little bit of technical know-how, but it's pretty easy to pick up. So it's not something you don't necessarily have to go to school to learn how to switch out a photo, but you might be able to switch out the photo and then kind of move beyond that.
So, Ginny, I've heard a lot about your work, and it sounds pretty varied and kind of fascinating working in this area. Let's transition now to talking about your work experience and your education. What was your work experience before your current role?
So previously, I had done a lot of different things. Right out of high school, I actually did cosmetology school. So I was a hairstylist for a few years. That was until I went to community college for this type of role. That was the only higher education I had was cosmetology school. So I was a hairstylist for a few years. I worked a lot of retail over the years, big box stores and things like that. I did some screenwriting here and there. And then when I had my daughter, I was a stay-at-home parent for a little while. So I'd done a lot of things kind of over the course of 10, 12 years. Nothing was really clicking fully for me. There wasn't anything that I really wanted to stay in, I guess. And around the time that I turned 30 and had gotten divorced, I was sort of at that, crossroads in life where I have to kind of figure out what I'm doing at this point. So I'd spent a lot of time just sort of looking around and was kind of ready to choose my path, commit to something. And it was kind of nice. So I'd done a lot of different things, worked in different industries with lots of different people. So I felt like I had gotten a good level of experience just being with other people, working with other humans. It's important to know how to do that.
Ginny, you mentioned that when you're a single mom, you went back to school. Where did you go to community college and what program did you enroll in?
So I enrolled at AV Tech, which stands for Asheville Buncombe Technical College. It is the big community college here in Asheville. Pretty much everyone ends up going there at some point. You can tell because the parking stickers on everyone's cars. I mean, everyone talks about AV Tech. It is very well known, it has a really good reputation. And I had a few friends that I had met when I moved to the area that had gone there before. So I knew that it was a good school to check out. And I'd been looking at a few different programs. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I was looking at the dental hygiene program. I was looking at maybe a transfer degree. I really wasn't sure what I was going to do. I just knew that I needed to do something. So I had enrolled, and I can't even remember what I picked, because you select something when you enroll. It might have been the transfer program. It was something not related to this. And then kind of in that last 2 to 3 weeks, right before classes started, I was talking to some of my friends, and I just wasn't sure about which thing I wanted to pick, what program I wanted to enroll in. And the more I talked to them, and some of them had actually, I had one friend who had gone through a program at AV Tech that is the one that I ended up choosing to go forward with. And then a few others are in also kind of computer science related fields. And I'm not going to say they talked me into it, but they opened my eyes to it a little bit, that it might be something that I would enjoy and would be able to succeed in. And so just a week or two before classes started, I switched to what's called the digital media program, which is sort of a all-encompassing program where you learn some development. So you can learn how to build websites and things like that. You learn graphic design, learn a little bit of marketing, and you can also choose some electives to kind of hone in on some deeper development type classes. You also get to do what I believe are called kind of professional business classes, professional development. And those are things like learning how to write emails in a professional setting, how to actually use Microsoft Word. It seems so simple, but things like that, you don't realize there's a lot to learn. So the digital media program was sort of a mix of some creative stuff, but then also you get into some computer science.
Ginny, what did it feel like going back to school and enrolling in a technology program? How did you feel when you started?
I was very nervous. Since I'd gone to cosmetology school and that was the only thing, and that was when I was 18, I hadn't been in any type of higher education situation, you could say. So I was very nervous, and I felt kind of old and I felt a little out of place. But honestly, the great thing about community college is I get there, I immediately see that my classmates are a wide range of people and ages, and I didn't feel like I stood out in any way. It was really nice. There's tons of other non-traditional students there. There were a few that were right out of high school, but for the most part, it was a really wide array of people. And so my nerves kind of settled down almost immediately once I realized that I wasn't going to be some random old single mom just sitting in these computer classes. And it ended up being really great. I made some really good friends while I was there. Met a few people that I've stayed in contact with, and met one of my best friends there. So it ended up being really great. I was very nervous, but was extremely glad that I bit the bullet and went in-person classes. I did do a couple online classes, but it was nice going, and for the first time in my life, attending classes, sitting in the room like that. So it was a pretty big deal.
Ginny, how long did it take for you to finish your program at community college?
It took me right at 2 years. It is a sort of intensive program. You have to do some summer classes in order to finish it in 2 years. Not a big deal, but you can't finish it in 2 years without kind of really putting in the time. So I mean, I was definitely going full time, and then did summer classes and was able to finish right in the 2 years, which was my goal. As like I said, as a single parent, I had a sort of tighter timeline. I didn't want to take too long to complete something. And that was another reason why I really wanted to go into this field, this type of industry, is because I felt like I would be able to really get a job at after 2 years. I wouldn't necessarily need to complete another 2 years or 3 years somewhere else. And so I felt like getting this associate's was the best way to be able to get a good job in the shortest period of time.
Ginny, you mentioned that at community college you learned some technical skills, like a little bit of coding and web design, but you also mentioned that you learned some interpersonal skills. How do you use those interpersonal skills or things people sometimes call soft skills in your work?
So it is, excuse me, it is actually kind of surprising how often you have to use a lot of those soft skills, even if you are quote unquote a tech nerd, sort of sitting at home by yourself on your computer. You have to interact with a lot of people. You have to interact with your customers or your clients, but most likely you're working on a team. You have a lot of teammates that you have to work with. And that was something that sort of surprised me, was how collaborative this work can be. And if you aren't a team player, if you've never really worked in a group project, for instance, I mean, everybody knows in high school, community college is the same. You have group projects, and sometimes they're the worst because you don't know who's going to actually do work, who's going to show up, who's not going to do anything. And then you get out there in the real world, and life kind of is a group project. And so you have to be able to work with other people way more than you probably would anticipate going into this. Luckily for me, I have worked retail and had a lot of customer facing jobs in the past. So I feel like I kind of already had some experience with that. And I encourage some of my classmates that really hadn't had those types of jobs before to take advantage of some of the things they were teaching us in those kind of professional development classes. We had mock interviews, we had some mock networking events, things like that, where you're, really going through the whole thing and meeting people from companies and introducing yourself and, you know, writing up your resume and then talking to someone about it. And stuff like that is really valuable. I honestly think that's one of the most valuable things you can take away is how can I talk to other people? How can I talk to a potential employer? How can I talk to my colleagues? How can I talk to customers? So those soft skills and learning how to interact, I think, can honestly set you apart. I think when you get to the stage of actually interviewing for jobs.
Ginny, how did your life change when you started working in an advanced technology industry? What happened after you graduated from college and you got your first job? What was different?
I do think that you can get a lot of fulfillment, from a job. And I think that especially when you go to school, you work hard, you finish this thing, and then you get out and you actually get to do it and implement these things you've learned. And you realize that all those classes made sense, even when at the time some of them didn't make any sense. And it feels really wonderful, I think, to be able to have that transition, to work hard at something and then you get a job, and you're just like one day suddenly you look around, you're like, I'm doing it. I'm in this career. I'm actually doing the thing I wanted to do. Um, so I think that there's a big sense of accomplishment. And, what's really interesting is that I think specifically in this type of work, you learn a lot of technical skills at school, but it's amazing how many you continue to learn and you really continue to build on that once you're actually out in the field working. I learned so much my first year, especially out of school when I was working full time. Just so many little crumbs of things that I've been picking up in school were all suddenly starting to come together and build this whole bigger thing that I was finally understanding. So even if you're not necessarily continuing your education in a way of taking classes, you will continue to learn so much in the computer science field when you're actually working in it day to day.
Ginny, do you have a final call to action? for students or people who want to transition their careers and work in technology like you do?
So, my probably biggest piece of advice, and I actually gave this to a friend recently, so it feels fresh in my brain, I guess, but it can be really intimidating, especially if you are like I was kind of having this big life change and having to make some big decisions. You're not necessarily 19 living at home and have a lot of time to figure it out. Maybe you're in a situation where you also have a tight timeline and you need to kind of turn this around pretty quickly. So, because it's intimidating, I think that the big questions of what do I want to do with my life? What kind of career do I want to go into? I actually think those sometimes can be a little too big. And so if you start smaller, and just think about what's really important to you, things like, do I need to be able to work remotely? Do I need a really flexible schedule? Do I want to make sure I never have to work on a Saturday? Things like that. Do I want to work for a big company? Do I want to work for a small company? And I think when you start figuring out kind of what you want your life to look like, it actually helps you narrow down the potential career fields that you would go into. You probably don't want to be a nurse if you don't want to work 12-hour shifts. You might not want to be a dental hygienist if you actually hate the idea of sitting in an office and looking at people's teeth. So there are certain things that you have to start thinking about. And I think that if the questions are too big, break it down into smaller questions first. I honestly had never even considered, not even once, going into anything computer related. I owned a computer. I did not use it very often. I never understood the internet. And I would have never thought that I would go into anything kind of tech related. But it ended up being a great fit. And it helped answer a lot of those smaller questions about what do I want my day-to-day life to be like? What's flexible? What's challenging? I love, reading crime fiction and watching detective series. I like being a detective. And this was a really great way for me to use my detective skills when you're troubleshooting or doing tech support for someone and trying to figure out what's wrong and following the trail of clues. So I think you don't necessarily have to find that special thing that you're super passionate about and that's the exact job you want to do. I think that if you answer some of the other questions, that you may be surprised by the industry or field that you end up going into. So I think if it feels overwhelming to have this big transition, break it up into smaller pieces, smaller steps. And I think that will help you make the bigger decision ultimately.
Ginny, I love that advice. And I hope there are people out there who consider careers in technology just like you have, because you have got a really inspiring story. So thank you so much for being on Talking Technicians and talking with me about your work.
Yeah, it was great to be here. I appreciate you having me.
Please keep in touch.
Thanks.
Talking Technicians is produced by MNT-EC, the Micro Nano Technology Education Center, through financial support from the National Science Foundation's Advanced Technological Education Grant Program. Opinions expressed on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the National Science Foundation. Join the conversation. If you are a working technician or know someone who is, reach out to us at info@talkingtechnicians.org. We're always looking out for great guests to share more stories with you.